And Astral Foods has been allowed to implement an aviation flu vaccination program at one of its large breeding farms in Gauteng. The approval by the Department of Agriculture follows an 18-month application process. Strict conditions have also been outlined for that process, involving a vaccine supplied by an international manufacturer, which is already in use in other countries. This development comes amid an ongoing outbreak that has impacted the broader poultry industry. Astral Foods CEO Gary Arnolds discusses this with us. Thank you so much for your time, Gary. First, talk us through the strict conditions that come with this vaccination approval.
Yeah, good day, and thank you for your time, and to your listeners, viewers. Look, the strict conditions are applied because of the impact that the vaccination has. So if I can start there, the vaccination allows the birds to develop a level of immunity to infection. So if the birds are infected with highly pathogenic avian influenza or bird flu, they are able to fight off that infection, whereas previously the birds would have otherwise died or had to be culled under the Animal Diseases Act as a disease control measure. So the fact that the birds can now ward off or fight off that infection may actually mask field infection. In other words, the birds will get the virus and you may not necessarily know this. So the guidelines that are enforced, or the strict guidelines, require us to monitor that flock very carefully. It requires molecular surveillance of those birds to ensure that we either know they're positive for a field infection or negative. Now, if they're positive and they don't die from the disease, the risk to the broader industry is that if you move those birds, they still are able to shed the virus while they're sick or infected, but at a much lower level. So what would happen is you would spread the virus to other poultry livestock around the country. So the strict conditions are that the farm is treated with very strict biosecurity measures, and that the monitoring, surveillance, and movement of those birds is strictly controlled. So the guidelines in that respect are very, very stringent, and one has to comply with them.
It sounds like quite a sensitive process, but let's also talk about what necessitated the sourcing of this vaccine that is supplied outside of South Africa.
Look, bird flu is it's impacting global poultry producers. You would have recently heard in the news about the outbreak in Brazil. And of course, it's been well publicized that North America and Europe have had a very bad winter season, and in terms of their experience with bird flu, and it spread quite rapidly, across numerous countries and states in the US. So the disease is a global problem. It's not necessarily a local problem, but in 2023, the local poultry industry suffered severe financial consequences at the hand of an outbreak of bird flu in this country. Vaccines are produced globally for the H5 strain of the virus. Not all countries have adopted the use of a vaccine, but there are numerous examples around the world that have adopted use of the vaccine. Our Department of Agriculture in November 2023 developed guidelines for a vaccination strategy against the highly pathogenic bird flu for South Africa, and those are the guidelines against which we applied to vaccinate, and then are making use of a vaccine that has been registered for use in South Africa.
On that note, you touched on the issue around the impact that this has had on trade. The bottom line, as you rightfully indicated, this is not only a South African problem, but a global one. What is the impact in terms of estimation so far in 2025?
Look, globally, a number of countries have been barred from, and I can only talk about South African imports. So a number of countries have been barred from exporting chicken to South Africa on a phytosanitary basis. In other words, our regulators and authorities have stopped frozen chicken coming into South Africa from countries that are positive for bird flu, and that serves to protect the local industry against infection. So it can be quite disruptive to trade flows. In the case of vaccination, this particular farm, or any farms that we apply for vaccination, they're downstream farms, and the processing environment, that chicken will be for local consumption. It won't be exported. I have to say as well, we're only vaccinating breeding stock. So it's, within the poultry rearing value chain that we're vaccinating. We're not vaccinating broilers that you or I ultimately consume or buy from the retailers. This is only the breeding stock that has been vaccinated, and it serves to protect those birds. And then, of course, it will protect the further integration and the supply of broilers into the South African industry or sector.
Lastly, how fast will this vaccination process then help mitigate with the current outbreak?
Look, there have been a couple of confirmed cases very recently in the last week in South Africa where the strain H5 bird flu has been involved. So, of course, it's been a major concern for the industry that the country would experience an outbreak of bird flu again, as we did in 2023. So one of the major risks that we've faced, and we've highlighted that in previous correspondence or in sharing our results with the sector. The vaccine we currently await a supply of vaccine stocks. That's on its way right now as we speak to South Africa. It's we're waiting for confirmation of that. As soon as it arrives, we'll get onto the farm, start vaccinating these birds for which we've been granted permission to vaccinate. That will be completed within a few days, and the birds will develop a level of immunity to bird flu within about 3 weeks. But, the one farm that we've been granted permission to vaccinate is only about 5% of our breeding stock. But at least this is a start. It offers a blueprint for further applications. Now that we are able, to meet these conditions, it makes it a lot easier going forward to meet these stringent conditions. And we will certainly, work towards rolling this out to other farms in the near future.
Thank you so much for the time. All the best. Astral Foods CEO Gary Arnold, they're talking to us about the permission granted to vaccinate against avian flu.